Could it be? For me, your man, Louie T, here on behalf of Bleacher Report, talking about the Washington Commanders and my final 53-man roster projection. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock p.m., 53-man rosters have to be finalized across the league. So league-wide teams will be cutting down their rosters over the next 36 hours or so to determine what 53 guys they're going to roll with going into the season. Now, obviously, it's a very fluid situation. Even when that roster's trimmed down to 53, as in the case, I think, of the Commanders, even after it's trimmed down to 53 initially, doesn't mean that's the way the roster is going to look when they're ready to roll on September the 8th in week 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There will be some alterations made to the roster. I think the Commanders will go sniffing around the waiver wire. Remember, they're second in the waiver claim behind Carolina. So even after initially the 53-man roster is set and they've made their decisions on who they want to keep and who they want to move on from and who they want to stash away on the practice squad, I still think you're going to see some moves. And I think some of the guys that are ultimately going to make the initial 53-man roster are only there as glorified placeholders, essentially. So I just want you to keep that in mind. And I'll explain some of those players as we go through the 53-man roster. But let's go ahead and jump into my projections, what I think is going to happen, who will miss out on the team, who will ultimately make it, and is their stay permanent, or are they just holding the roster spot for someone else to come in and potentially take it? So obviously we start on the offensive side of the football. I think most of these are going to be pretty self-explanatory. One or two of these may go either way. There are some decisions to make on this side of the football. You start at quarterback. I think this one is a no-brainer. They're going to keep two quarterbacks. Most NFL teams, if they can help it, only keep two quarterbacks. This is not a position that you want to divulge a lot of roster spots to, because if things go well the way that you plan them to go, only one quarterback should be seeing the field, right? So in this case, you've got your veteran backing up your rookie, and you're good with that. You don't need two veterans backing up the rookie quarterback. You just need one. So if Jaden weren't starting and they didn't think he was ready to play in any capacity, then you would need to keep a third quarterback. But that's not the case here. He's starting. They feel good about him. You got Marcus Mariota backing him up. So obviously the two guys that will miss out on the roster here are Sam Hartman, the undrafted rookie out of Notre Dame, who missed the last two preseason games with an injury. They were going to put him on the practice squad anyway. They like him. They want to continue to develop him. And then Jeff Driscoll, if he's able to clear waivers, no one signs him, he'll be on the practice squad as well, I believe. I think they like both of those quarterbacks. They do not like Sam Hartman enough to put him in an NFL game, push come to shove, which is why you would keep Jeff Driscoll around. Should things go awry at the quarterback position and you need a third quarterback, it'd be Jeff Driscoll, not Sam Hartman. Running backs. I've said this all along. I don't think this is a team and a roster that is talented enough at the running back position to keep more than three running backs. This roster doesn't demand that you keep a fourth running back. So you choose between the five or so running backs that you have that have, real shot to make this roster. Those five are Brian Robinson Jr., Austin Eckler, Jeremy McNichols, Michael Wiley, and Chris Rodriguez Jr. You choose from those five, you take three of those guys and you move on, right? I don't think there's really any real discussion that's necessary as to why a fourth running back would be necessary. So you got Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. Those guys are locks. The real conversation started to heat up after the second preseason game against the Dolphins about who RB3 was. I could be reading this wrong, right? There's one of two ways to read the way that they played out the final preseason game. Jeremy McNichols was the starting running back, essentially, with no Robinson or Eckler. And he looked good in the best he's looked all preseason in his limited reps early in the ball game. Next off the bench was Chris Rodriguez Jr., and it felt like they were showcasing Chris Rodriguez Jr. to the rest of the league because they're not going to keep him, and they wanted to get him some film out there so he could maybe latch on with another team. because I think they want to keep Michael Wiley and they want to be able to stash him away on the practice squad, and they didn't want to showcase his skills. I could be reading that all wrong. And the reason that they didn't play Wiley as much is because they know they're going to keep him, and they wanted to showcase Jeremy McNichols and Chris Rodriguez to the rest of the league. I think that they are going to keep McNichols because of his special teams ability. They're going to stash Wiley on the practice squad, which is why they didn't showcase him as much as they had been the previous 2 weeks against the Jets and the Dolphins. And they wanted Chris Rodriguez to get exposure around the league because they're not going to keep him here in any capacity on the practice squad or on the active roster. So I've got these three guys, Brian Robinson Jr., Austin Eckler, and Jeremy McNichols as the three running backs on this team. I'm a Michael Wiley guy through and through, and I wouldn't be shocked if he replaced McNichols as the third back. But I just think it's going to come down to special teams, and McNichols is the far superior player in that regard. Wide receiver 5. This one was tough because initially, when I made this 53-man roster, initially, I only had 23 players on the offensive side. And then I went and did the defensive side, and I only had 25. So I had 2 spots left to come back and play with. And so I had to force guys back onto the roster because when I was done, the way that I think I was done, I only had 23 players. And I said, well, let me see how defense works out. Maybe they'll need the other roster spots because theoretically speaking, when you do this, should be 25, 25, 3. It usually doesn't work out that way, right? It usually doesn't have that perfect symmetry. 25 on offense, 25 on defense, 3 on special teams. But I didn't know because of how many safeties potentially Washington could keep, et cetera, et cetera. So I was like, let me just see what it looks like on defense. I had to come back and force guys onto the roster. And initially I had 6 receivers, or 6 after I came back, but I had to tweak something, and I'll tell you what that was a little bit later on when I get to it. So I went back to 5 receivers. So what it boiled down to is, do you keep a 6th receiver or a 4th tight end? I went back and forth, and I told myself, don't be emotional. Don't be a prisoner of the moment with Martavis Bryant because it's so easy to do that. And I almost got caught up. When I came back, I put him on the roster the second time around. And then when I had to come back and take a spot away, I took him away instead of Cole Turner. And I'll explain my reasoning here in a second. But let's go through these receivers quickly. I got them keeping 5. Now, I think they're going to look around the league and see if they can find another guy. So I think there are 2 positions in particular that they're going to be very active. And I won't limit it to just those 2 positions. If they find a corner that they like out there, they'll bring him in, right? But I think they're primarily looking at defensive end / edge rusher and wide receiver. Now, again, I think they like their defensive tackle position, but if they see a undersized defensive tackle with some quicks that they like, I wouldn't be shocked. Like, don't be shocked by anything, right? But Terry McLaurin, De'Ami Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus, and Luke McCaffrey locks, right? We've been saying that for a long time, and Jahan Dotson for a long time was in that mix as well, which is what pushed the number to 6 automatically, and then potentially a 7th if they wanted to go that far. With the now absence of Jahan Dotson on the roster, there to me is no real need for 7 at this point. And 6 is even a stretch, if we're being honest with one another. I've got Byron Pringle getting that last spot. He adds value as a receiver, but more importantly, he adds tremendous special teams value as a guy that can play all special teams, not just in the returns game. Byron Pringle just serves a bunch of purposes here, and hence I got him making this roster, and I think he's the last receiver for now. Let's go to tight ends, and then I'll explain my decision-making between wide receiver and tight end. So I've got 4 tight ends. Initially, I had 5 receivers and 3 tight ends when I put this list together initially. Zach Ertz, John Bates, Ben Sinnott, and Cole Turner are the 4 tight ends that I have making the team. Initially, it was just Ertz, Bates, and Sinnott, and no Cole Turner. I felt like Turner had played his way off the roster after being on the roster to start this process. He had a really rough go of it in the preseason, catching the football, penalties, and it wasn't for a lack of trying or effort. It just felt like he was trying too hard. Like head coach Dan Quinn said, he was kind of pressing, trying too hard to be perfect, trying too hard to make a play. And instead it was ricocheting and backfiring on him. And he was getting the opposite of his intended result. In any event, I went back and I watched Cole Turner, and he's what you call a core four, right? He's on all four special teams. You always got to pay attention to guys like that. And with the new rules set up the way that they are, I think tight ends and safeties become more important on special teams in particular because of their versatility, their body type, their ability to move in space. And so I think Cole Turner is a guy that initially makes this roster instead of a Martavis Bryant, who doesn't serve any other purpose other than being a big body receiver down in the red zone and a guy that can run. He doesn't know the entire playbook right now, so he's kind of limited as to what you can call with him in the game. And keep in mind, he hasn't played in the NFL in 6-7 years, whatever it is. They can continue to bring him along on the practice squad. Nobody was looking nor checking for Martavis Bryant, and no one has been for the last 5-6 years. So again, you can cut Martavis Bryant, put him on the practice squad, and he can still be around the team. And if you need him, you can pull him up. Same with Jamison Crowder. He's another name that I wouldn't be shocked to see him make the 53-man roster, but it just doesn't feel sort of like how it didn't feel right with Jahan Dotson. It doesn't feel right with Jamison Crowder to me right now. It doesn't feel like they value him as a member of this team. They value him as a guy that is there if they need him on the practice squad. That's what it feels like to me right now. Cole Turner plays special teams, and he's the fourth tight end, so he doesn't necessarily have to see the field a ton. But if they need him, it's good to know that he's there. I think there are going to be 2 roster spots that are going to be the first to go when they find guys out there on the streets that have been released from their current rosters during the 53-man cut down league-wide. And I think Cole Turner is among the first to go, right? If they find somebody and they have to rearrange the roster to adjust it to fit in the new guy that they just brought in, Cole Turner will be one of those guys. I think he's a placeholder right now, a roster spot holder, if you will. So those are the 4 tight ends for now. And then offensive line, I feel really good about this group in terms of who's making the team. Now, I could be wrong about this. There's only one guy that could infiltrate this list and blow up my whole 10. They won't keep 11. I feel good about that. So I think the number is 10. And the way I have it set up is I have it set up with a first-team offensive line and a second-team offensive line. So first-team offensive line is left to right, left tackle, Brandon Coleman, left guard, Nick Allegretti, Tyler Biadasz at center, Sam Cosmi, right guard, right tackle, Andrew Wiley. The backups for all of those positions across the board from left to right, again, Cornelius Lucas, Julian Good-Jones, Michael Dieter, Ricky Stromberg, and Chris Paul. So those feel like a strong 10 offensive linemen. You got 4 tackles in the mix and 6 interior offensive linemen. That's the way you want it to be. You have at least 3 or 4 different guys that can play center. Every single guy on the interior can play guard. Chris Paul can also play tackle, which is why you don't need Trenton Scott, who is missing from this list. He did not play last night. So on one hand, you could read that as he's pretty safe after the game. Dan Quinn said that anybody that didn't play that wasn't injured, you can kind of deduce that they're probably safe on the roster. I don't know that I feel that way with Trent Scott. I think they might have tried to hide him. And again, it's not like he's some undrafted guy or some second-year player that the rest of the league may not have caught on to. He's been in the league long enough. Teams know what Trent Scott is all about. And I don't think you need to hide him. So he may be on this roster, right? He may be on this roster, and a guy like Julian Good-Jones isn't on this roster. I don't think they're cutting Ricky Stromberg. All right. I don't think they're cutting Ricky Stromberg. But I think if they had to swap someone out, it'd probably be Julian Good-Jones. But Who knows? He's been playing with the twos strictly and exclusively this entire training camp and preseason. So one of the few guys that hasn't jumped from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3 throughout his time. He's been with the twos the entire time from the word go. Dieter has run with the ones at times. Stromberg has been with the threes for most of camp and then got up to the twos as recently as a week ago when they released Mason Brooks. And Chris Paul has had some reps with the ones. So, and so has Cornelius Lucas. So the only guy that's been consistently a 2 is Julian Good-Jones. And maybe that's good for Jones. I had to do it. I'm sorry. That was terrible. So 24 on the offense. Now we go to the defense, and I've got 26 on this side of the football. We start with the defensive line. I've got 9 defensive linemen, and same thing I did with the offensive line, I did with the defensive line here. I got the starters across the line, this time from right to left: Cleveland Farrell, Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, Dorrance Armstrong Jr. You got Dante Fowler Jr. as an edge, KJ Henry as an edge, and then Fedarian Mathis, John Ridgeway III, and Johnny Newton as your 3 defensive tackles. Now, I've heard a rumor that there may be some redundancy here that they may be looking to get rid of, maybe try to trade someone, if that's possible. I don't want them to mess around with the defensive tackle position. I like the defensive tackles just the way they are, especially with Johnny Newton's ailing foot and all of the injuries he's dealt with. I just don't think you're in a position to move on from any of your defensive tackles until you can prove that Johnny Newton is completely healthy and he's reliable. You shouldn't be looking to move any of these defensive tackles. You've got 5 on the roster. They're all very good and ready to help you right now, with the exception of Newton. We have to see with him. I think you should keep that. As far as the defensive ends are concerned, Farrell, Armstrong Jr., Fowler Jr., and KJ Henry are your 4 edge rushers. Fowler Jr. has been listed as a linebacker at times. That's a bit confusing for me. I'm going to keep it simple because I know he's not playing linebacker for this team. He's going to be rushing the quarterback when he gets in the game. So I'm leaving him as a defensive end for the purposes of this exercise. It's a solid group, but I think they're looked to upgrade it. And the first guy off this list that'll be relegated to the practice squad, should they find a guy that they like out there, is KJ Henry, right? I've talked about him. He had a strong finish to the preseason. That was a great game he had against the Patriots. But they're still going to look to upgrade that position, as they should. I think that's one of those waiver wire positions that you should keep an eye on for the Commanders, along with wide receiver if something should arise. Linebacker, there are 5 of them. This is an interesting decision that I made here. I'll tell you why. I had 4 linebackers when I initially made this. Remember, I told you I only had 23 players on offense initially, and I had 25 on defense. And then I had to think about something. Jordan McGee, who's on this list? Let's go through the list quickly. Linebacker, 5. Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner, Jamin Davis, Jordan McGee, and Michael Walker are your 5 linebackers. Initially, I had 6 when I did this the first time early in August. And the 6th linebacker was Anthony Pittman. He's not making this roster, nor should he. He has not been what I think they were hoping he would be, from a tackling standpoint, especially in the preseason. So he's getting cut. So for me, when McGee went down, this number was reduced to 4. But after learning McGee's injury was a meniscus injury, one that he was looking to shave the meniscus, and instead of having like real surgery to repair a meniscus tear, they were shaving it, which is a lot less time out of the lineup. So let's say that that's 4 to 6 weeks. Well, the first game would be a month time elapsed since he had the procedure done, right? So they may opt to not put him on the PUP list to start the season off, right? Because if they think he can be back by, say, week 2, that'll be 5 weeks since the procedure. He's young. He might be able to get back out there 5 weeks after the procedure. Who's to say? They don't want to put him on the PUP list and have to have him miss the first, 4 games of the season. So they may put him on the 53-man roster initially, But they could also go back and find a few players and say, hey, we need a roster spot. And they could look at Jordan McGee and say, you know what? We're going to give you all the time you need, young fella. And they may go out, find another linebacker or find a defensive end or find a receiver or some guy at another position that they feel like can come in and help this team. And they may say, we're going to put Jordan McGee on the PUP list. After he initially was on the 53-man roster, they may go back and put him on the PUP list to start the season off to give them another roster spot to play around with. So I think he's another placeholder along with Cole Turner. He's the other placeholder. He could stay on the 53-man roster if they think he can be ready within the first 3 weeks of the season. But he could also be a guy that they hold a roster spot with initially, and then as time passes and they find someone on the waiver wire, they could then use his roster spot as a spot that they can put towards another guy while he's on the mend on the PUP list. And then he doesn't have to rush, right? So that's something else to keep in mind. But for now, I've got him as one of the 5 linebackers on this team. Cornerback, there are 5 of them total. This number has not changed, and this group has not changed. I think this might be the easiest group for me to identify all the guys that are going to make the roster. Would I be shocked if they added a 6th corner here in Chig Anuzium? No, I wouldn't be, but I don't see them doing that. Emmanuel Forbes Jr., Benjamin St. Juste, and Michael Davis are all outside corners who have solidified their spot on this roster. Meanwhile, Mike Sainristil and Noah Igbenogany are your 2 nickels. Mike Sainristil has also shown the ability to play outside as well. So that to me limits the need for a 6th corner. If you're telling me Mike Sainristil can go outside and play on the boundary as well, then now you have 4 guys you feel good about. And even Noah Igbenogany, if need be in a pinch, can go out there too. So they're good with these 5 guys. I don't see them adding anybody to this list. Safety, I got a little bit out of hand here, and I went with 7. It's the versatility of this group. I've heard a rumor here, too, that there's redundancy, which there is, within this group, and that they're looking to potentially, trade a guy or maybe cut someone. So I doubt this number is 7, but I'm sticking to my gut. My gut says 7 initially. And again, I liken it to Cole Turner and Jordan McGee. Like, one of these guys could end up being a placeholder in the event that they find a player out there at another position of need, like receiver, like defensive end, and or even linebacker. If they don't love linebacker with Jordan McGee's injury to start the season off, I could see them using one of these safeties as a placeholder. And then when they find that guy to come onto the roster, that they, release one of these safeties and put him on the practice squad. But to start out, I think they keep 7 safeties. The versatility of this position in this defense, safeties also cross-training as linebackers. And then also the special teams aspect of it with the new kickoff rules and how versatile safeties can be in that role as movers in space, blocking people, things of that nature. I just think this position right now holds the most value on the team in terms of flexibility and versatility. So I think the number is 7. Jeremy Chin, Quan Martin, Percy Butler, Derek Forrest, who feels like he's very much so on the bubble, Jeremy Reeves, Dominique Hampton, and Tyler Owens. If you're coming after a spot here down the road, it's either Owens or Forrest, it feels like. The other 5, I think, are good. Dominique Hampton is interesting. They drafted him. So I just off the strength of that, I refuse to cut him. But he really hasn't stood out necessarily this camp. So you could make an argument that you could cut him, but if you cut him, you run the risk of somebody else who had a draftable grade on him, who doesn't necessarily love their safety position, picking him up. So I just don't see that happening. With Tyler Owens being passed on by everybody in the league 7 times, I think you feel good about cutting him and getting him back on the practice squad. And then Derek Forrest only has 1 year left on his rookie contract. So if you cut him, you don't feel as bad about cutting a guy who's going to be a free agent next year anyway, right? So Forrest feels very bubblish. So does Tyler Owens. Dominique Hampton feels safe to me because you got a guy on a rookie contract for 4 years. You just don't want to mess with that on a cheap rookie contract at that. So I think it's either Forrest or Owens here that you're looking at, and you're saying, if we need a spot, we can go to one of those two and get it, right? And I think they're going to be 2 or 3 guys at it. When you go around the league and you look at what's going to be done, I think it's going to be 2 or 3 guys at it from other teams that were cut off the waiver wire. So we'll see what they ultimately decide to do, but I think 7 is the number right now, initially. I think this number will ultimately be 6 when it's all said and done. After they go out, hit the waiver wire, find a couple of guys, and they'll come back and trim off some of the fat at safety, I believe. But initially, it's going to be a pretty fat position is safety. And then the specialist, this one is already set right now. We got this one pretty much mapped out here. You got 3 specialists to round out the roster. Tressway as the punter, no doubt about that. Cade York went 4 for 4 on his kicks in his one preseason performance versus the Patriots on Sunday night. 2 field goals, pretty much chip shot range, 33 and 34. And then both of the extra points went through the uprights as well. So they traded for him. He did what he needed to do. I wanted him to be tested a little bit more. I wanted him to have to kick a 46-yarder, 51-yarder, something like that. We had a chance and we blew it. But he's on the roster. And then Tyler Ott is definitely on the roster. And what a blessing Tyler Ott has been. After the struggles at long snapper last year, that's a position you never want to have to talk about. To not have brought up Tyler Ott other than someone bringing him up, asking how's he doing, just because of how bad it was last year, you take certain positions and certain things for granted, like the center quarterback exchange. You take that for granted because it's just something that's supposed to happen, right? Shouldn't be any issues there. We watched the game with the Patriots last night, and Drake May fumbled like 3 snaps, right? It's something you take for granted. You take the long snapper snapping the ball back to the punter or snapping the ball back to the holder on a field goal or an extra point. You take it for granted. We don't anymore as Commanders fans. After the fiasco that was last season, we no longer take that for granted. So God bless Tyler Ott. Okay. So those are your 3 specialists. So I'll go through this quickly. 24 on the offensive side, 2 at quarterback, Jaden Daniels, Marcus Mariota, 3 at running back, Ryan Robinson Jr., Austin Eckler, Jeremy McNichols. That gives you 5. Terry McLaurin, De'Ami Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus, Luke McCaffrey, and Byron Pringle are the 5 receivers that I have making the roster, which gives you 10 on the offensive side of the football. 4 tight ends, Zach Ertz, John Bates, Ben Sinnott, Cole Turner, gives you 14 total on the offensive side of the football. I think Cole Turner is a placeholder. If they need a roster spot, he may be the first guy they go to replace him from someone off the waiver wire. 10 offensive linemen, Brandon Coleman, Nick Allegretti, Tyler Biadasz, Sam Cosmi, and Andrew Wiley are your 5 starters. 5 guys backing them up: Cornelius Lucas, Julian Good-Jones, Michael Dieter, Ricky Stromberg, and Chris Paul. Gives you 24 offensive players. As we go to the defensive side, where you find 26 players, 9 on the defensive line. Cleveland Farrell, Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne, and Dorrance Armstrong are your 4 starters. Dante Fowler Jr., KJ Henry are your 2 backup defensive ends. And Fedarian Mathis, John Ridgway III, and Johnny Newton are your 3 backup interior defensive tackles. Linebacker, 5. Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner, Jamin Davis, Jordan McGee, Michael Walker. Jordan McGee is currently injured and easily could be placed on the PUP list. They do not have to do that right now. They can keep him on the initial 53-man roster, and then if they need his roster spot, they can then move him to the PUP list, and that will free up a roster spot. I think that is what they're going to do with Jordan McGee initially. So while the number may be 5 right now, I think it is ultimately 4 before the season starts. Cornerback, 5, right? So you've got 14 defensive players after 9 defensive linemen and 5 linebackers. 5 corners make it 19. Emmanuel Forbes Jr., Benjamin St. Juste, Michael Davis, Mike Sainristil, and Noah Igbenogany. That position feels locked, stocked, and ready to go. Safety, 7 to round out the group and give you 26. Yes, it's a robust number, 7 is. I know. I've never seen this many safeties kept on an NFL roster until now. Jeremy Chin, Quan Martin, Percy Butler, Derek Forrest, Jeremy Reeves, Dominique Hampton, and Tyler Owens. Just like I said with Cole Turner and with Jordan McGee, although there's no one hurt here at the safety position, if they need a roster spot for someone that they've claimed off of the waiver, you could come to the safety position immediately and grab Tyler Owens or Derek Forrest. Those two seem to be the ones that are in danger the most. And if you're going to pull one, it'd be one of those two. And if you need another one, you can go to one of those two again, right? So I think this number is 6 by the time we get to week 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But it's going to be 7 initially. And then specialists, you got 3, and this is as locked up as it gets. Tressway, Cade York, and Tyler Ott to round out the 53-man roster. So there it is. The 53-man roster for the Washington Commanders. We'll see how close I get. I think I'll be within 2 or 3 players. Last year, I got 48 out of the 53. The year before that, I got 46. So if I can get in the 50s, that'd be awesome. I think I will. I feel really good about what I've just done. But, you know, a lot of moving parts after the Jahan Dotson trade that kind of threw a monkey wrench into my thought process. And so we'll see what happens. But ultimately, that's how I feel about this list in particular. And we'll see what happens. So I'm surprised we haven't heard any names trickle out today as to what they're going to do, but we'll see what happens, right? Bottom line is, they're not going to be a bunch of massive, changes to this roster. It is what it is. We've watched these guys perform all summer. This is the first year of Adam Peters and Dan Quinn and company. And so this is a roster that's far from complete. A lot of holes, a lot of things that they have to improve upon, but you can't fix everything in one offseason. So you roll into the season with what you've got. You hope that guys improve along the way. And then you reassess the roster next year and you improve it with the draft and free agency once again. So I think this roster is going to look pretty much the way that I see it, right? Again, with maybe 1 or 2, possibly 3 alterations made to it. And then they're going to hit the waiver wire and see if they find anything there. And I expect them to claim at least 2 or 3 players. So we'll see what happens ultimately. But I feel good about my 53-man roster. What says you? Anyway, leave it down in the comment section. Love to hear your responses. But that's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on behalf of Bleacher Report, talking about the Washington Commanders' final 53-man roster. This is my final projection. What says you? Where did I make a mistake? Who did I leave off the list that I shouldn't have? Who did I put on the list that I shouldn't have? Can't wait to read your responses. Until then, and we'll be back tomorrow because we'll have our final 53-man roster tomorrow. So we'll be back tomorrow at some point. But until then, you guys have a good one. Take care. See you next time.